Hello, welcome to the CTS compliance training for ADA in Section 504 and also Title IX. This training was created by June Henderson, Director of Human Resources and Title IX Coordinator, and Carol Hatfield, SDA Coordinator, Administrative Assistant for Supervised Ministry, and Student and Faculty Support. The objective of this training is divided into two sections. Part 1, we will focus on ADA and Section 504. Part 2, we will focus on Title IX. And our objective will be an overview of the laws, the policy overview for CTS, CTS procedures, and then contact information for both ADA and Title IX. At the completion of this training, you should be familiar with ADA section and Section 504 and Title IX laws, understand CTS responsibilities, and know the process and procedures for compliance. So to begin with, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 have similar statutes. There are 4 federal laws that prohibit discrimination on different basis. Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Title VII prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin in employment. Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender and sex. And then finally, for disability, ADA and Section 504. That section prohibits discrimination on the basis of a disability. So part 1, we will focus on ADA and Section 504. So let's start with what is ADA? ADA is the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. When it was first passed, it was a very strict law in its definition of a disability. So the definition is the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, is a federal civil rights law structured to provide equal opportunities for all people with disabilities and protects individuals from discrimination based on their disabilities. Because of the law was so strict and very narrow when it was first passed, an amendment was passed in 2008. So the ADA Amendments Act of 2008 was more flexible and broad. It expanded the list of major life activities, and it also included that episodic or diseases in remission may still be considered as disabilities. So what is Section 504? So under 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, this section protects individuals from discrimination based on their disabilities. It covers any college or university that accepts any type of federal financial assistance. So under 504, this is where students with a disability may receive accommodations and modifications. Compliance with the requirements of Section 504 will ensure compliance with the ADA. Both of these are enforced by Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, or the acronym OCR. So what is CTS policy as it relates to disabilities and accommodations? So CTS is committed to providing equal access to its programs for all qualified students with learning, physical, medical, or psychological conditions and aims to provide reasonable accommodation for qualified individuals with a disability to ensure their access and participation in CTS program. So it's important to know that in order to provide an accommodation, the student must be qualified. A qualified student meets the academic and technical standard for admission or participation in the institution's educational program or activity. So what are some criteria to be eligible? Number one, you have to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Number two, have a record of such an impairment. And then number three, be regarded as having such an impairment. So if you meet those criteria, then a reasonable accommodation under Section 504, you would be eligible. Now, as far as providing reasonable accommodation, CTS does not have to change the fundamental nature of a program or be subjected to undue financial hardships. And if anyone has questions about what does it mean about changing the fundamental nature of a program, please don't hesitate to reach out to Kara Hatfield. I'll provide her contact information later on in the presentation, or the Dean of the Faculty. So what are some reasonable accommodations that may be made? Alternative test-taking formats, note-taking services, recording lectures, books in alternative formats, adaptive technology, extended time for tests and assignments. So those are some typical accommodations that would be made. So what appears now is a list of the major life activities that a physical or mental impairment would have to substantially limit in order for it to be considered a disability. Keep in mind that the ADA does not define what is a disability, it just describes an impairment. What the ADA does in describing an impairment is that, remember that it must substantially limit one or more major life activities. So now let's take a look at an impairment versus a disability. So an impairment is defined as any loss or abnormality of psychological, physiological, or anatomical structure or function. A disability is defined as any restriction or lack resulting from an impairment or ability to perform an activity in the manner or within the range considered normal. For example, a physical impairment, say a person lost their leg in an accident. That would be a physical impairment because they would not have use to that leg. A physical disability would be the inability to walk because of the loss of the leg. That is an example of a physical impairment along with a physical disability. An example of a learning impairment is, say, if someone was diagnosed with dyslexia. So that's the impairment. And the learning disability would be because of their dyslexia, their inability to read. So those are two examples of an impairment versus disability. And again, CTS SDA coordinator or Student Disabilities and Accommodations Coordinator is Kara Hatfield. You can reach Carol by email, chatfield@cts.edu. Her phone number is 317-931-2330. And her room or office number is 250. She's located in Faculty Row in the CTS main building. So now let's talk about the process for requesting an accommodation. The student will first contact the SDA coordinator, Carol Hatfield. Carol will provide the student with a packet. So the student must submit the completed paperwork each semester or course for which an accommodation is requested. The student must submit relevant current documentation of a disability from a qualified health professional. If a student reaches out to a faculty member about accommodation, please direct them to contact Carol, the SDA coordinator. Accommodations for reported disabilities should not be provided without notification from the SDA coordinator. So to receive an accommodation, a student must first, again, contact the SDA coordinator requesting an accommodation. The SDA coordinator will provide them with an accommodation packet to the student. And this packet will include the CTS policy and related forms, the student request for accommodation, the student permission to release information, notification of accommodations with instructor. The student completes this student request for accommodation, returns that to Carol. The student would then meet with the SDA coordinator to discuss the request. And then the student and instructor meet and complete the confidential notification of accommodations with instructor form. And all of these documents, once completed, are returned to Carol in the SDA office. All medical documentation must be reviewed and updated every 3 years. All completed forms will be kept in the SDA coordinator's office. Any student disability information is kept confidential and only provided on a need-to-know basis. So consult with the SDA coordinator and the dean if you have any questions. So in summary, a confidential notification of accommodations with instructor letter will be emailed to instructors before class begins. Recorded in class. So if a student have an accommodation that allows them to record in class, they have permission to record in class, students will be instructed to not share the recording or record highly personal information shared in class discussion. For advisors, you will be notified that your advisee is receiving accommodations. So some common accommodations may include the student will have a minimum of 1.5 time to complete assignments. Students are allowed an extra absence. Books will have audio access and any articles. Note takers. The SDA office will arrange for this. Students are allowed to always use captioning for classes. Students are allowed the option of attending class via Zoom due to their disability, or students may request furniture accommodations as well. So, such as a desk that can be raised or lowered, or a chair with arms. If that is the request, the furniture will be labeled with the student's name, and it is asked that the furniture not be removed from the classroom. So if you have any questions regarding making an accommodation or the ADA process, please contact Carol Hatfield and she can assist you. So part 2 of the presentation is Title IX. And I will discuss CTS Title IX process. So what is Title IX? Title IX of the Educational Amendments Act of 1972 states, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So Title IX can be divided into two categories. One is discrimination and one is harassment. So under discrimination, we would be talking about sex and gender discrimination and then program equity. Under harassment, we would talk about quid pro quo, hostile environment, or retaliation. So the definition or an example of quid pro quo is if a faculty member asks a student to say, go out to dinner with them in exchange for a passing grade in the class. That's a quid pro quo example. And hostile environment is if the faculty member in the class was treating the male students in the class and degrading the female students in the class. That would be creating a hostile environment. And then retaliation. If someone reports the discrimination or harassment, and then the teacher fails them, then that will definitely be retaliation. The CTS's policy on Title IX is that we are committed to providing students and employees an educational and working environment free from all forms of harassment and discrimination. The CTS Title IX policy prohibits all forms of discrimination and harassment based on protected status. It also prohibits sexual violence and sexual exploitation, which are prohibited forms of sexual or gender-based harassment. The CTS Title IX policy also has protections against retaliations. So examples of a protected status would be age, race, gender, ethnicity, marital status, veteran status, sexual orientation, gender identity. All of those are considered protected status. CTS Title IX policy applies to all genders, students, faculty, and staff, and the conduct is prohibited on campus or off campus. So again, those protected characteristics I mentioned, the complete list would be prohibits inappropriate conduct on the basis of sex, race, color, national or ethnic origin, religious belief, age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, marital status, familial status, pregnancy, citizenship, genetic information, veteran status, or any other legally protected status. So CTS Title IX policies have protections for all of these characteristics. Again, my name is June Henderson. I am the Title IX coordinator at CTS. I can be reached by calling 317-931-4213, and I am in room 185, which is located within the Finance and Operations Suite in room 185. 185A in the Finance and Operations Suite 185. So let's talk about some key terms within Title IX. So if you are a victim, you will be referred to as the complainant. Someone who is alleged to be the perpetrator will be referred to as the respondent. A third party or someone who is not the complainant, who is making a report on behalf of someone else or just as witness to someone else or have the information shared with them, they will be considered the reporting party. We have mandatory reporting, so all faculty and staff members are obligated to report. Exceptions to this mandatory reporting would be for counselors in the counseling center. So they are not mandated to report. A formal complaint is a document filed by a complainant requesting an investigation. And supportive measures are non-disciplinary, non-punitive, individualized services provided to the complainant or respondent. So supportive measures, they could be counseling, coursework adjustments, modification of schedules, mutual restrictions on contact. All of those things will fall under supportive measures, and they could be provided to both the complainant or the respondent. So when we are asking for you to make a report, what must be reported and when? So the name of the complainant, the name of the respondent, the date, time, location of the incident, name of any witnesses and their contact information, if you have it, details of the incident, any supporting documentations, and report as soon as possible after receiving the information. Now, it is possible to make an anonymous report. It is possible for a complainant to file an anonymous report. However, we would be limited on remedies because a respondent does have a right to know who has filed charges or a claim against them. Now, after a complaint has been filed, it is possible to have an informal resolution. And this would mean that both parties must provide voluntary written consent that they are agreeable to an informal resolution. If the allegation involves any kind of sexual harassment, then those informal resolution would not be provided. So when a report is filed, and it could be made in person, by mail, by telephone, by email, there is a report form that could be filled out, whatever manner it happens. The Title IX coordinator promptly responds to the complaint, and the entire process to resolution should be completed within 75 days. So that means the Title IX coordinator will reach out to the complainant to get information on what happened, speak to any witnesses. A determination would be made if it falls under Title IX or if it's a student conduct issue. If it does meet a student conduct issue, then it would be forwarded to the dean of faculty. If it is a Title IX issue, then the Title IX coordinator will continue with the investigation until time a resolution is determined. Any emergency measures may be taken during that period. If an investigation moves forward, both parties are notified, and CTS may dismiss all or part of a formal complaint if it determines that the alleged conduct does not meet the standards under Title IX. So things to remember and what CTS obligations are under Title IX. Our obligations are to investigate, to stop the behavior, to prevent its occurrence, and to provide a remedy as a solution. If you have any questions regarding Title IX, please contact June Henderson with questions by email. You can also email Title IX, TITLEIX@cts.edu, or you can call me directly, 317-931-4213. Thank you for your attention during this training presentation. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Carol if you have questions about the ADA process, or to June if you have questions regarding Title IX. Thank you.